We all know we live in a world with these massive, gaping inequalities between the rich and the poor. And it forces us to ask a really fundamental question. What's a truly fair way to set up a society? To get our heads around this, let's just jump right in with a specific and, well, kind of wild example. Okay, check this out. A United States Supreme Court justice makes somewhere around $200,000 a year. Judge Judy, the TV judge, makes $25 million. Is that fair? I mean, your gut reaction is probably no way, that's insane. But explaining why it feels so unfair, that's where things start to get really complicated. And to help us unpack all of this, we're going to turn to a philosopher named John Rawls. He came up with this incredibly powerful way of thinking about what he called distributive justice. And that's a fancy term, but it's basically just about the rules for deciding who gets what in a society. So Rawls kicks things off with a thought experiment. Imagine this. You get to design society from the ground up. You write all the rules. But, and this is the big catch, you have absolutely no idea who you're going to be when you enter that society. From that position of total uncertainty, what kind of rules would you make? This clever little thought experiment is the absolute key to Rawls's entire argument. He gives it a great name. He calls it the veil of ignorance. And the whole point is to force us to think about what's just and fair from a completely impartial point of view. By putting us in this original position of equality, as he calls it, the veil of ignorance makes us be fair. I mean, think about it. You're not going to design rules to favor the rich if there's a 50-50 chance you could end up poor. You're not going to create rules that benefit one group over another because you don't know which group you'll belong to. Yep, behind that veil, you are completely in the dark. You don't know if you'll be born into a wealthy family or a poor one, if you'll be naturally athletic or face physical challenges. You're ignorant of your race, your gender, your religion, all of it. So you have to choose rules that you could live with no matter where you happen to land. So Rawls argues that the very first thing we'd all agree on is to protect our fundamental rights. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, that kind of stuff. Why? Because nobody would risk ending up as part of an oppressed minority. You're just not going to gamble with your basic rights for a little extra cash, right? The risk of being on the losing side is way too high. All right, so basic rights are covered. But what about all the other stuff, like money and opportunity? This is where Rawls really starts to question the ideas of fairness that a lot of us just take for granted. And he does it by looking at a few different systems, each one trying to be fairer than the one before it. Let's just walk through the logic here. You start with a feudal system, born a lord, die a lord. Clearly not fair. So you might move to a free market system, where at least in theory, careers are open to anyone. Better. Then you try a meritocracy, which really tries to give everyone a fair shot. But Rawls says, nope, we need to go one step further, to what he calls an egalitarian model. The free market, or libertarian, idea says that as long as anyone can technically enter the race, the outcome is fair. But Rawls points out this huge, obvious flaw. Come on, it's not a fair race if some people get to start 10 feet from the finish line just because they were born into a rich family, while other people have to start a mile back uphill in the mud. And that's exactly the problem that a meritocracy is supposed to fix. The whole idea is to correct for those unfair starting advantages. It's why we create things like public education, Head Start programs, need-based scholarships. It's all an attempt to bring everyone to the exact same starting line so they have a truly fair chance to compete. But even in a society like ours that really tries to be a meritocracy, let's look at the reality. This data from 146 of the most selective colleges in the US shows that 70% of their students come from affluent families. And from the poorest quarter of society, only 3%. So yeah, it's pretty obvious that where you start still makes a massive difference. But this is where Rawls pushes even harder. He says, okay, let's just imagine a perfect meritocracy where we somehow get everyone to the exact same starting line. Who wins the race then? Well, the fastest runners, right? The people born with natural talent. But then he asks the killer question. Did they do anything to deserve being born a fast runner? Of course not. That's just what Rawls calls the natural lottery. And letting your entire life be determined by that is just as morally random as being born a duke. And Rawls himself put it perfectly. What is just and unjust is the way that institutions deal with these facts. He's not saying it's unfair that some people are born with more talent than others. That's just life. The injustice, he says, is when we build our entire society to just heap rewards on the winners of that genetic lottery, without any thought for the people who didn't win. So what's the alternative then? Well, Rawls argues we shouldn't try to handicap the fast runners. That's not the point. Instead, we should change the rules of the race itself. We change the terms under which people get to benefit from their good luck. And this leads to his big solution, the difference principle. And it's a pretty radical idea. It basically says, sure, let there be inequality. Let some people earn way more than others. But, and this is a huge but, we only allow those inequalities to exist if they are part of a system that ends up benefiting the least well-off people in our society. So take Michael Jordan. He can be a global superstar, he can make his millions. But under the difference principle, that's only considered a just arrangement if the system that allows him to do that, the tax structure, the social safety nets, is also designed so that a piece of those earnings goes to improve the lives of the people who, well, weren't blessed with his amazing talent. Now, I know what you might be thinking. The most common objection to all of this is effort. People will say, wait a minute, I worked hard for my success. I deserve it. But Rawls has a fascinating response to this too. To get us to rethink our idea of effort, consider this little fact. In one Harvard class that was studied, 80%, 80, of the students were the firstborn child in their family. Now, psychologists will tell you that birth order often has a huge impact on your work ethic. But did you do anything to be born first? Of course not. Rawls's point is that even our ability to put in effort is shaped by things we can't take credit for. And this brings us to a super important distinction between what Rawls calls moral desert and legitimate expectations. Okay, so moral desert is the idea that you are intrinsically worthy of a reward. You truly deserve it in a deep moral sense. Legitimate expectations, on the other hand, just means you're entitled to a reward because you followed the rules. Let me give you an example. If you buy a lottery ticket and it wins, you are absolutely entitled to the prize money. But did you morally deserve to win any more than the thousands of other people who also bought tickets? Rawls would say no. Think about David Letterman, making millions of dollars a year. He's just lucky to live in a time and a place that puts such a high value on his specific skill of telling a smirky joke. If he'd been born in a warrior society or a hunting society, that talent would have been pretty much worthless. The value of our skills is completely dependent on what society happens to want. It's just another form of luck. So in the end, looking at our own success through Rawls's eyes can be a really humbling experience. It suggests that while we're entitled to the benefits that the rules of the game promise us, it's a huge mistake to think we morally deserved a society that just so happens to value our particular qualities. And it leaves us with a really profound question. What do we owe to those people whose talents our society doesn't happen to reward so handsomely?